everybody, and welcome to your 5-8 problem training. My name is Angel Burgos. I'll be your instructor for today. Today we're here to cover the 5-8 problems module. I'm going to basically touch the setup of the module, what's necessary to actually utilize the module, getting into the module, and basically using every facet, every piece, every tool that the new application has to offer. What I do want to point out is that this session is for you guys. We do this live session so you can interact with us. Questions. You want to get your hands on it or see if you could utilize the application yourself. At the end of the session, feel free to stick around. I'll give you some time to actually get in there and get some hands on it if you want. This session is for you. Just keep that in mind. So what we're going to cover today. All right. So we're going to start off with some industry knowledge and terminology with the ICD10 mandate. We're going to talk about why we're doing this, what's causing it, what important dates are out there that you need to be aware of, that sort of thing. We're talking about our general equivalency mapping, or what we call GEMS, between ICD9 and ICD10, and basically allow us to bridge the gap between these two applications, or these two versions of the ICD values. Then we're about some meaningful use 2 stuff for SNOMED, the clinical problem list, and how we're going to meet those requirements as an organization. Hank will talk about as well, and what they're going to bring to the table for us. They're a third-party content provider that are going to help us bridge, set us up GEMS and synonyms and some other neat things. Talk about EHR, ICD10, and meaningful use 2, SNOMED, and how it's going to look within the actual problems module. Now, in the problems module, this is also known as the diagnosis module. Previously, it was just considered the diagnosis module, but now we do have the capability of capturing problems as well as diagnosis within the same module, so you're referred to as the problems module going forward. Talk about the problems module and the ability to search for ICD billing values, as well as the new search engines that are available for both, not only the ICD section, but the So I just got a quick message in the link just saying that the link that I put out there doesn't work. I'll think of a way of getting you the documentation. Well, file maintenance and the enhancements in file maintenance. The ICD-CM code master file. We'll talk the diagnosis code library, the payer master file, the diagnosis categories master file, and how all that's set up. The file maintenance, and when we're reviewing the file maintenance, one that I do want to point out is that we're going to blur the lines a little bit when it comes to this is EHR, this is EPM. With this particular application and this version, you're going to need to know a little bit about both. So some of the stuff that we're going to talk about, if you're only interested in EHR stuff, we'll go over into the EPM side and we'll talk a little bit about that stuff as well, just giving you a heads up. KBM templates. We're going to talk about KBM templates very, very briefly. And what we're going to talk about is basically the interaction between the version and the actual KBMs. So essentially, where things are and what they're going to do within the new application. That's about the extent of it. If you start asking questions about KBM, I'm going to say that's a KBM question. We're getting ready to deliver KBM training for 8.3. Right now, all we're talking about is version-specific information. Anything that relates to a KBM question, I'm just going to default on you and basically say that we'll address those questions during the KBM training. Keep that in mind. information bar, there's a new patient information bar that displays links for the ICD billing list in SNOMED. We'll take a look at that. Where is how you turn it on and how to utilize it. We'll talk about some EHR reports. Obviously, with the new functionality that the application brings to the table, you're going to need to be able to run ad hoc reports, and we'll take a look at some of that information. And lastly, we'll talk about importing conversions and the migrating of data for those clients and those users that are going to need access to this application. So something that we're going to talk about here is the ICD10 codes and the mandate. This is basically a HIPAA requirement stating that we must use ICD10 codes by October 1st, 2014. So that's going to be an important date for you to remember. 2014, October 1. We're going to need to utilize ICD-10 codes. Who's going to need to use this? Everybody that's covered by HIPAA, not just those that submit Medicare claims, but everybody. That means providers, your physicians, clearinghouse, and covered entities. A second. Call user 19. Putting you on mute. Phone is ringing. Your providers, physicians, clearinghouse, and payers are HIPAA-covered entities. So basically, anybody that utilizes the application, they're going to need to utilize ICD-10. Now, there are going to be certain payers that don't utilize ICD-10. And the one that comes to mind is workers' comp. They're the only ones that aren't covered by HIPAA. So the only ones that can get away with still utilizing ICD-10, ICD-9. And we'll talk about how that's going to be handled from a system requirement. Must with HIPAA requirements and upgrade to ICD-10. So what does that mean? That means that the end users are going to need to be on version 5.8 in order to utilize ICD-10 and the requirements by October 1st, 2014. A mandate replace the code standards from ICD-9 to ICD-10 for October 1, 2014. We already mentioned that. To meet this requirement, we're basically updating everything from EHR to EPM applications to make sure that they're compatible with ICD-10 codes. And basically reformatting everything to ICD-10 codes. And that's not just with any application, meaning from a version perspective, but also from a KBM requirement. So every facet of the application is going to be updated to accept ICD-10 codes. The 5.8. So I'm rid of ICD-9. It's basically outdated. There are categories within ICD-9 that no longer allow for the expansion of that particular category. So new diagnosis and new things that have come out, they add on to the ICD-9 code category. All right. So another thing is it's over 30 years old and be inadequate in regards to the current knowledge and disease process, contemporary medical terminology, and modern practice of medicine. No longer considered usable for today's treatment, report, and payment process. Format limits the ability to expand code sets and new codes. I always say that I remember back to when my mother was mother, and she was talking about ICD-10 coming out back then. So I want to say that somewhere around 20 years ago that she was talking about this stuff, and now we're finally seeing it come to a head. So keep that in mind. It's old. We're going to be replacing it. From ICD-9 code set to ICD-10 code set basically provide the addition of new procedures and diagnosis not accounted for in ICD-9, greater specificity of diagnosis-related groups and preventative services, improved reimbursement, fraud detection, and historical claims, and diagnosis analysis. For those who don't know, there is a procedure set, code set, that goes along with the ICD code sets. We don't usually use it in ambulatory, but it's more of a hospital care setting thing that they do have the capability of utilizing. What codes? It basically refers to the diagnosis and procedure code sets. Again, there are two code sets. Primarily, when you think ICD, you think of diagnosis, but there is a procedure code set. All right, it's by the World Health Organization in almost every other country in the world. All right, so this is an important thing. Every other country in the world is using ICD-10. All right, the United States usually is on the breaking point of everything. They're usually up front and using the latest and greatest for everything. In this one case, we stayed on ICD-9 and let the rest of the world figure out ICD-10. We have been utilizing morbidity codes and send that information, ICD-10 standards, but about it. What does this do for us, though? On a grander scheme or grander things, a platform, what it does for us is it allows us to basically speak one language, one terminology to basically document what's going on with our country and from a healthcare perspective. That do things for us beyond belief. I mean, it's going to be able to give accurate depiction of diagnosis and the different epidemics and different things like that. So the research that's going to go along with this is going to be immeasurable. So just a grander scheme outside of our regular scope, just something to think about. Abbreviated way to refer to the International Classification of Disease, ICD. It's just what we're going to be doing. ICD-10, the International Classification of Disease, 10th revision. Modification is going to replace the ICD-9 version, as we already mentioned. Between ICD-9 and ICD-10, there's going to be an increase in code. It's going to be huge. We're going from somewhere like 13,500 codes in ICD-9 to about 70,000 codes in ICD-10. The changing characters, so we're going from 3 to 5 to 3 to 7 codes. All right. Those things alone are pretty huge. Each code specificity, so again, you're going to be able to down to such a granular level that it will actually depict exactly what's going on with that particular patient based on a specific code or your ICD-10 code that's associated with the patient's chart. Patient documentation. All codes must be supported by clinical documentation. Be big. Most providers, they go in and they document accurately, and they are very meticulous in their documentation, making sure that the information is relevant to the coder to make sure that they are eligible to receive that particular reimbursement code. But just understand that it's going to be a little bit stricter with the reimbursement process just because of the simple fact that the code is going to be so granular. It's actually going to depict exactly what's going on from a location, reality of the actual patient. So just keep that in mind when you're dealing with your providers. A lot of them are going to, they're not going to have a problem because they do it already. They already document so accurately or almost document more than enough information for it just so they could know exactly what's going on with that particular patient. But those providers that don't want to document anything, they don't want to click on any of the checkboxes or free type any of the information in, those ones that you're going to have to work with and express how important it's going to be for them to document accurately. Think now about this major change to be able to meet the compliance deadline. That's more of a note for your patient or for your clients. Start talking to your clients now. Once they're on site, I know a lot of them are just getting up to 5.7 or just getting to the latest KBM. That's fine. Start talking to them about what they're doing to meet this mandate. All right. So the ICD10 mandate is coming. Again, October 1st, 2014 is not a long time. We got just about a year to meet this requirement. So what are your clients doing? Are they sending their codes out to classes to be certified? Are they starting to look at the differences between ICD-9 codes and ICD-10? Now, to be honest with you, again, we'll be ready for this. The original date of release for ICD-10 was supposed to be October 1st, 2013. So the government came back and pushed the date back to full year to 2014. With release of 5.8, Shen would have been compatible and would have been able to the requirements as far as getting the application to all of our clients. Now that's a different story. As far as passing and being able to utilize ICD-10, once we release 5.8, we'll be able to meet this requirement completely. We'll grid it to basically see exactly what's going on. Again, 13,000 to roughly about 70,000 codes, 3 to 5 characters versus 3 to 7 characters. ICD-9 numeric or alpha character would be the first character, so we would have some B codes, some G codes, things along those lines in ICD-9. Now ICD-10, every code is going to start with an alpha character. So keep that in mind. The remaining characters for ICD-9 used to always be the 2 to 5 characters, would all be numeric after that first character. Well, in ICD-10, it's going to be numeric, and then it's a combination. So your first character is going to be an alpha character. The second one is going to be a numeric character. And through 7 is going to be any combination of numeric or alpha characters. Length still is required, 3 characters, and use of a decimal is going to be after the third character. Again, visualizing an image for you to basically take a look at the differences between ICD-9 to ICD-10. We have a couple of these slots. A breakdown of an ICD-10 value. As you can see, you have the category there. It goes down to your location, your laterality. Really breaks the values down. As I mentioned previously. Here's a comparison of an ICD-9 code to an ICD-10 code, or the equivalent, and how granular you can get with that particular code. The tier format and increased clinical granularity of ICD-10 codes will have an immense impact. Will require a significant increase in clinical documentation to support the assignment of all ICD-10 codes. I mentioned to you previously, you just have to make sure that you're documenting enough information to meet the requirements. As you've seen, it gets down into a granular level. It's so, it shows the laterality, it shows the, it gets so the anatomic site, the extension, the category, it just really breaks it down in such a level that you want to make sure that you're documenting accurately. Again, important date to remember, October 1st, 2014. Look talk about the mappings between ICD-9 and ICD-10. We mentioned we went from 13,500 codes to about 70,000 codes in ICD-10. So there's going to be a lot of exception, so to speak, between the mapping of ICD-9 to ICD-10. A large majority of the ICD-9 codes will have a one-to-one mapping, meaning that if it existed in ICD-9, there's a single equivalent of ICD-10. But there's some additional mappings that we'll talk about. ICD-9 ICD-10 will play a critical role in the successful transition of ICD-9 to ICD-10. The general equivalency mapping, or GEMS, to bridge the language gap between ICD-9 to ICD-10 is going to be very important. Basically, what this is going to do is going to make it so the end user will be able to, if they're familiar with their ICD-9 codes, actually search by utilizing an ICD-9 code and have the equivalent ICD-10 code appear. CDC created the GEMS, general purpose mapping, which are public domain. Other GEMS are available. Here we're going to get into some of the mappings. As I mentioned to you, I think it's something like 95% of the codes have a one-to-one mapping that you're going to be able to look for an ICD-9 code and receive an ICD-10 code that's equivalent. But we have other ones, such as one-many. So here there was a single code in ICD-9 for spot complications during pregnancy. And now we have multiple values. Basically, the last character of the ICD-10 value is what trimester the patient is actually in. So you can see here that spotting complications during pregnancy of the first trimester, second trimester, and third trimester. Sequentially, you'll see the numbers of the 026.851, 2, and 3. And you're just seeing a one-to-many mapping there. A 0-to-1 mapping. So previously, this value did not exist in the actual ICD-9 value, which now exists in ICD-10. Or a many-to-one, where there are multiple values, but because of granularity, we can now equate it to one single value. So before we talk about meaningful use and SNOMED and that piece, are there questions about the ICD-10 and the mappings and anything else that has to do with ICD-10? Again, we're going to see it in work and in the actual application, how it plays out, how the application handles ICD-10 codes, and all of that. So don't be concerned about that just quite yet. But any broad questions about what's going on within the application. So if everybody's on the same board with ICD-10, go ahead and just click the green dot on your, or the green check mark on your on participants, just to make sure that you're still with me. There you go. All right, thank you, folks. Good. And you know, if you have any questions throughout the rest of the session, feel free to just speak up, ask the question, and we'll take a look at it. So let's talk about meaningful use 2 and the SNOMED CT. So for use 2, we are required to capture terminology via SNOMED. So with SNOMED, we're going to be able to capture it. This was a bit of a difficult or a challenge for us to try to get people to wrap their heads around, but we'll take our best shot at it. The creation of electronic medical records, we're forcing our providers to utilize ICD codes. ICD codes were meant as a of documenting and an administrative value only. Because it was easy for us to attach to a patient's chart, we're forcing our providers to utilize ICD codes to actually depict clinical findings for that particular patient. So they had to fit whatever their findings were or whatever they seen that was going on with that particular patient to an ICD-9 code. Well, years ago, when we were still on paper charts, what they would do is they would go in and they would just document whatever their findings were. If they found that the patient had a cold, that's what they would document on the patient's chart. The patient was suffering from a cold, or they had headaches, or they had a heart attack. They would document this exactly in the patient's chart. What would happen is an actual coder, a clinical coder, would then review the findings in the chart and then assign a ICD-9 code with that particular patient and send out for reimbursement. The provider worked on their own or they had a private practice. Very rarely did they get into the billing aspect of it or the coding of it. They allowed the coder to go in and document based off of what they wrote in the patient's chart. God bless the coders, because they would have to deal with the chicken scratch that most providers write with, and they would have to interpret that information and come up with some type of clinical finding that would then fall into an ICD-9 code for reimbursement. Since EHRs came out, we always forced them to have to write an ICD-9 code or document on their patient's chart ICD-9 codes. With this meaningful use to requirement and making us utilize the SNOMED codes, basically giving the power back to the provider. We're allowing them to document a cold as a cold. Not worry about the actual ICD code that's going to be associated with it. They'll go in, they will type in exactly what their findings are for their particular patient. And that information will then transcribe over into a corresponding ICD-9 or 10 code, depending on the time frame. Being said, just keep that in mind as we're going through this. You'll some other things, and we'll talk about what and how this is all going to work as we get in. The thing that I want you to think about is when you hear SNOMED or you hear the meaningful use to part, I want you to think of clinical terminology or clinical representation. When you hear about billing ICD, I want you to automatically think about your rated piece or your billing piece. Reimbursement, that sort of thing. All right, moving on with the meaningful use in SNOMED problem list. Basically, a breakdown of what's required for meaningful use certification. SNOMED represents all types of clinical data. ER uses standard clinical vocabulary to represent clinical observation of patient problem list. Apply a subset of SNOMED CT that represents diagnosis. And for electronic exchange of clinical information. So again, this is just what's required, what SNOMED is. The acronym for Systemized Nomenclature of Medicine, extensive clinical terminology formed by the merger of SNOMED RT, reference terminology, and the United Kingdom National Health Services, NHS, clinical terms. Provides clinical content and expressivity for clinical documentation and reporting. Concept vocabulary to represent clinical information across the scope of care. Can be used to code, retrieve, and analyze clinical data. Designated as the U.S. Standard for Electronic Health Information Exchange and Interoperability Specification. Basically utilizing the clinical terminology to present what's going on in that patient's healthcare. CT. It is concept oriented. So it's basically on the documentation. So it's again utilizing the that a provider is used to using. Is of meaning described by a unique code, a name, and a set of terms or descriptions. So what this is basically saying is that you have a code that is associated with the term that you're utilizing. And automatically you may think to yourself, well, if I'm going to use some type of code, why don't I just use ICD-9 or ICD-10? Code is not really meant for the end user to memorize or utilize as a search tool. It's basically just for the system, for the computer to categorize this information in the background. The name is actual, what we call the fully specified name, or the parent name, so to speak. The terms would be the synonyms. So if there's correlated synonyms that associate with that fully specified name, that's what you would find as the description. Here's a breakdown, or a visual breakdown of what we're talking about. Myocardial infarction. There's a concept ID, which is a series of characters there that mean absolutely nothing to me or to the end user, but as a system, it's a way to key in information. So the background of the computer utilizes it to basically generalize the information. But you'll see all these synonyms here. So myocardial infarction is the fully specified name. Then you'll see the synonyms. So myocardial infarction, MI, infarction of the heart, heart attack. Any of these values will be associated in the patient's chart. And not the big thing about it is that if you use heart attack to find or to document within the patient's chart, it's not going to pull up the myocardial infarction and replace heart attack with myocardial infarction. It's going to put heart attack into the patient's chart. Myocardial infarction will be the fully specified name, which will be associated with the heart attack. But anywhere within the chart, from the template to EPM, it's going to say heart attack. All right, so just keep that in mind as you're dealing with the SNOMED, or you're looking at the SNOMED values. So in SNOMED, National Health Terminology Standard Organization, or ICD. They're responsible for the ongoing maintenance, development, quality assurance, and distribution of the SNOMED CT. National Library of Medicine is the U.S. member of the ICD, so they're basically our board member that sits on ICD as the National Library of Medicine. The Library of Medicine provides free of charge to anyone in the U.S. So there is no charge for the SNOMED CT anymore. It is charged from the Library of Medicine. What is between ICD-10 and SNOMED? And this is, again, getting into around this whole process, because you're going to need to document SNOMED codes as well as ICD-10 codes. They're both meant for something completely different. ICD-10 is a classification system typically used for processing billing claims for reimbursement. Bills for reimbursement, non-clinical, guys, non-clinical. So again, we mentioned this earlier when we first started talking about the SNOMED mandate, or use to mandate, and basically stated that to break lines here, you think of ICD-10 as your billing system, your claims and reimbursement, your non-clinical aspect. CT is a clinical terminology typically used to codify clinical information captured in the EHR during the course of patient care. Clinical. Classification system and clinical terminology are designed for distinctly different purposes and satisfy diverse user data requirements. Again, one's your clinical, one's your non-clinical. Actually, in in your brain from the moment that we started talking about this, and keep with that thought as we go through and as we get into the application. And ICD-10, billable, admittive. SNOMED, clinical. All right. Everybody's with me. If there's any questions about SNOMED and the meaningful use 2 requirement, please go ahead and speak up now. If you are okay with it and ready for me to move on, go ahead and just click on the smiley face in the window there. See a couple still with me. You guys, good stuff. HLI, third-party content provider. The third-party content provider, HLI, are going to provide us with the basically the cross mappings between multiple areas. Let's take a look at some of those areas. So they're a third-party vendor that we're partnering with. To with the synonyms that are going to be associated with the SNOMED CT codes. So as we mentioned to you earlier, there's going to be a fully specified name and then a bunch of synonyms. Well, they're going to offer to us not only the synonyms that are associated with SNOMED, but provider-friendly terms. What this is going to do is it's going to make it, they're going to utilize clinically relevant terminology to make it easy for us to search for these values. This is going to be huge because the end users are not going to have to go in there and create their own synonyms or their own key terms as we have in today's. They're going to do it for both, not only SNOMED, but your ICD values. So you're able to go in and see your ICD values and see the synonyms that are associated with them as well. Again, not having to create the key terms that we used previously. More importantly, they're gonna supply us with the cross mappings between the following sets. You're gonna have ICD-10 to SNOMED, SNOMED to ICD-10, ICD-9 to SNOMED, SNOMED to ICD-9, ICD-9 to ICD-10, ICD-10 to ICD-9. Think for a minute. They're gonna create all of these tables, 70,000 codes, so to speak, just in the ICD-10 value. And correlate that with all the codes and all the clinical terminology that exists out there from a med perspective. A couple things for us. It's going to, again, give us the synonyms to make it easy for the end user to find exactly what it is that they're looking for. And 2, it's going to allow us to utilize SNOMED, type whatever clinical findings the provider finds, and with one click, 2, depending on if it's a one-to-many value, over the corresponding ICD-9 or ICD-10 code, depending on date. Here's a question, and we'll talk this briefly. The question states, is it going to be built into the new version, or will there be some configuration necessary to make this work with the problems module? There'll be configuration, and we will talk about that as we get into it. And this is probably the first screen that you're going to start seeing what's required for configuration. Mappings, again, are going to be handed to us. So we're not going to need to ourselves. So that means the client's not going to have to do it. Next not going to have to do it. It's going to already be there. Just think about how much time this is going to save us from a development standpoint. They're giving it to us. They give us the hierarchical condition category, or HCC, and prescription drug hierarchical condition category data for ICDs. That's going to be utilized with the Medicare Advantage or Medicare Advantage Plus use. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But now on, throughout the rest of the training, you're just going to hear me refer to it as HCC or RxHCC, but that's what it stands for right there. Inc. Data will be integrated into the NextGen database and the EHR application. This is huge. So, end users will not need to have internet capability in order to run searches based on Health Language Inc. or on these cross-mappings. It will be embedded directly into our system. So there will be no, like I said, internet requirement needed, no configuring to make this work from that perspective of making sure that you have web access and that sort of thing. So it's a link to external service or services from the application. It's actually embedded within our system, which is huge. Practice, additional synonyms for ICD codes and SNOMED codes will be integrated into the HLI data and be supported throughout the EHR. So, and it's not just finding information and then utilizing some key term with the rest of the system. Whatever synonym you use, if you call it a heart attack is going to be embedded and seen throughout the entire database. Of HLI data will be available on the Customer Resource Center and imported using the clinical data loader. Now, this kind of goes back to answering the question of will there be some configuration necessary? Yes, there's a couple different things that you're going to have to do in order to utilize the new problems module. One is you have to download the clinical loader from the Customer Resource Center. This will be available once this application or this version is GR'd. We're scheduled to GR in the next week or two, so just keep that in mind, that you may not find the new clinical data loader out there yet, but it will be. Now, before we move forward, you have to run the clinical data loader before you utilize the problems module. The problems module will not work at all if you not run the clinical data loader. It's probably one of the most important ones that you're going to have to do out of the ones that I'm going to tell you that are part of setup that you'll have to do is this clinical data loader. We're going to go in. If you get into your problems module and you run a search, whether it's in SNOMED or in ICD, and you get 0 results found, and the file maintenance, and you know that there's ICD codes there, you know that there's vials there, you know that your libraries are there, but you're getting 0 results found, it's probably because you have forgot or did not run the new clinical data loader. Clinical data loader, all it is a wizard, guys. It's very easy to walk through. You click, next, and it basically goes in and imports all of this data for you, very similar to what you would use for your formularies and your e-prescribing and that clinical data loader. These are going to be available on I have this answer, it's in the back of my head somewhere. I think it's on a monthly or if not quarterly release. So I find the answer for you. It's one of those two, either monthly or quarterly. But nation is out there. Basically, I do it at the same time that I would do your other clinical data loader, your formularies piece. So I can't remember. I think it is on a monthly basis, but I can't say for sure. If not monthly, it's on a quarterly basis. Language Inc., again, synonyms. The primary task of clinical users in the EHR is to provide care to patients. Codifying and billing of the clinical diagnosis and problems done behind the scenes. I mentioned before, the end should be worrying about caring for the patient, right? We shouldn't be worrying about what ICD-9 code is associated with it. There was another question, is HLI a separate application? No, it's embedded within NextGen. It's partnered with them, so they are a third party, but content provider. Once you get the clinical data loader and run through that clinical data loader, the information will be embedded within NextGen. EHR will enable users to document ICD billing diagnosis and SNOMED clinical problems that best describe the patient's billing diagnosis and clinical problems, using descriptions that are based on clinical terminology and more familiar to clinicians. Again, giving the power back to the provider. All right, we mentioned this earlier. We're giving the power back to the provider, allowing them to use the clinical terminology they're used to utilizing to document actual findings for their particular patients. Clinicians will no longer be limited to using only ICD billing terminology when assigning diagnosis at the point of care. Again, we already mentioned that. Synonyms appear in searches. Synonyms appear in searches, and selected synonyms persist on the chart, not synonyms to simply help locate code. As we mentioned previously, the synonyms, if you select heart attack, is going to stay with that particular patient as heart attack throughout the actual chart. All right, not just saying heart attack to find myocardial infarction. It's going to say heart attack. And we'll talk about the synonyms a little bit more when we get into system admin. So ICD10 and SNOMED in EHR. If you pinpoint any one specific chart, one specific slide throughout this PowerPoint, this would be it. This is basically a breakdown of what NextGen's doing within EHR to account both ICD10 and SNOMED. So let's put here for a second. I'm going to share my application with you real quick. You could take a look at what the application is going to look like, and then we'll come back in and we'll continue on with the slide. Alright, you should be able to see my now. Diagnosis module will be found again in the tic-tac-toe bottom right-hand corner under Problems. It will then launch your Problems module. The Problem module is broken up into two sections. Your Problems list and your Billing list, Billing ICD list. Your Problem list is going to be your SNOMED and Clinical Terminology section, where you're going to go in, you're going to add clinical terminology findings you have to that patient's chart. Here, your billing. Before the billing, just show you briefly the search engine. Search for a cold. Yes, is layman's terms. Defines exactly what I'm looking for. All right. The search. It's got its own search engine for the problems list. Then you have your billing and ICD list. I come back here. Again, anytime you think of billing, I want you to think administrative and used for billing. Right. You'll notice that there is a new search engine. Working way though. Type in your clinical term, your term that you're looking for, run search, find your search, and add the value into the patient's chart. Two separate tabs, two separate search engines. Each one should allow for to utilize synonyms. So just keep that in mind. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing, go back to our PowerPoint. This is audio. Can everybody hear me?
Got me.
Thank you. Great. Okay. Basically saying ICD10 seems duplicate efforts, and most of the time, can you speak on this? I'm gonna get to that in detail as we move on. So just hold hold that thought and talk about it here in a little bit. So let's go over this slide. Now that you've seen it a little bit, let's talk about this here and what it's actually offering. So again, two separate lists, one problems module with two tabs. You have billing ICD list, which again is ICD10 mandate, which is a HIPAA requirement. It's codified in ICD. It is at the encounter level. So this is another thing that people are going to have a little bit of a hard time wrapping their head around. The billing side or ICD list is at the encounter level, which is where it's been as long as NextGen's been utilizing ICD codes, but used for billing, administrative, and reporting only. All right, so keep that in mind. Your billing list, your ICD piece of it, is specifically utilized for billing. Your problem list is a meaningful use requirement, meaningful use 2 requirement. It is provided in SNOMED CT. So just from the basic premise of utilizing this, why are you using ICD codes and SNOMED codes? As somebody asked, it's like a duplicate in efforts. Well, one is required by HIPAA. So by HIPAA, we have to utilize ICD-10. We have to use the billing side of it. This one is a mandate, a meaningful use 2 mandate, saying that if you're going to meet meaningful use 2 requirements, you have to utilize SNOMED CT. So that allows for us to document the full terminology. Now, moving on with this clinical problem list, codified in SNOMED, it's at the patient level. It'll follow the patient, encounter. It's not going to be encounter specific. So where the billing piece of it, they're going to be categorized by encounter date, right? The full problem list is going to be by patient. So you could have values in there from the first encounter that you've ever seen that patient all the way up to your present. It's used for clinical patient care and treatment, ability of clinical data and reporting. Again, the clinical piece of it is again allowing the provider to document their exact findings. All right. So whatever it is that they see is going on with the particular patient is exactly what they could document. They don't have to go in and find a corresponding ICD value for it. Now, billing is still going to need the ICD value for it, but from a clinical findings piece, the user or provider is going to be able to just go in, whatever it is that they're finding that's going on with that patient, and thanks to HLI, we'll be able to cross-reference into ICD values. All right, so big steps there. And each section has its own search screen. Our provider-friendly synonyms for both ICD-9 or ICD-10 and SNOMED concept IDs. Previously, the synonym description persists in the EHR across values. So EPM, EHR, it's not going to matter. Whatever synonym you select is what's going to follow. Cross maps between ICD-9 and ICD-10, and cross maps between ICD codes and SNOMED concept IDs. This is very important. This is going to allow us as end users, say I'm a provider and I'm going in and I'm using the SNOMED piece for my clinical documentation, using the SNOMED piece. Well, once you use that SNOMED with one click, possibly two, you automatically push the value into the ICD section. So then you're documenting both sections at one time. More about that when we get into the application. Health Languaging, third-party content provider of synonyms and cross-mappings, which we mentioned. And the last one is probably the most important one that we haven't talked about yet. There is no ICD-10 switch handled by a date solution. So very important there, talking about the ICD-10 switch. So basically it's just allowing the system to utilize dates versus a on and off button or check mark of some sort to say utilize ICD-10 or utilize ICD-9. so up to the end users. Now, we'll see exactly how that interacts within the application here as we go on. Here's a screenshot of the differences, how it looks between ICD-9 and ICD-10. Again, we're going to go in, we're going to see every piece of this, talk about every piece of it from top to bottom. Here we're going to talk about our date solution. So what we're doing is we're allowing the end users to utilize a date value. So essentially the effective date and the expiration date within the actual ICD-CM master file is going to drive what is going to show in search engine. So if those dates are showing for testing capabilities, you'll be able to see the information based upon the effective and expiration date. If it makes sense right now, I will show you in the actual application, and hopefully at the completion of that, it'll make a little bit more sense at that point. So the ICD-10 functionality is driven by date. So effective 10/1/14, all clients were required to use the ICD-10s when searching for a code. The pairs that cannot accept ICD-10 codes will be configured in file maintenance pair master file to use the GEM mapping. So essentially what's going to happen if there was an instance where a peer was not accepting ICD-10 values after the October 1, 2014 date, how are we going to handle that? Well, we'll build the table within the payer table for that particular payer. So if it was a workers' comp value that you wanted to set up to still utilize the correlating ICD-9 values, we could do that. So keep that in mind. Expiration dates for ICD codes are defined and stored in the ICD-CM master file, as I mentioned earlier. We'll get in there, we'll take a look at that, you'll be able to see it. ICD-9 codes will have their expiration date set to expire when the ICD-10 codes are set to be used. Effective on September 1st, 2014, you're going to have your ICD-9s expire, or October 1st, 2014, have them ICD-10s become effective. During the system will compare currently selected encounter dates and ICD effective and expiration dates to determine which ICD codes to display. So what's going to happen is the algorithms behind the scenes is going to look at the actual encounter date highlighted on, so patient location, provider, and date. That encounter date is going to be very important at this point. Based on that encounter date is going to populate and determine what search values are going to show in the application. Right? So ICD-9 versus ICD-10. If you have one that's a September date, you're going to receive the ICD-9 codes. If you have one that's an October date, you're going to receive the ICD-10 codes. This will meet the requirements. Let's say that the provider starts documenting the last day of September for a particular patient, and he doesn't finish the documentation, or she doesn't finish the documentation. They come the next day, and based on if we had just turned it on or turned it off, they would be stuck. They wouldn't be able to document the ICD codes accurately based on actual date. But now, because we're using a date value, if we're on an encounter date that is previous to October 1st, 2014, the end users will receive ICD-9 codes. All right, see that here as we get into it. When Diagnosis Selector is launched, the system will validate the diagnosis codes are valid compared to the currently selected encounter date and the diagnosis effective and expiration dates that are defined in the diagnosis master file. This will control whether ICD-9 or ICD-10 values display for selection. Only valid ICD a pair for selection. This will support cases when an encounter prior to October 1st, 2014 was not yet completely documented and will need to use the ICD-9 codes that were valid at the time of selection. Patient diagnosis lists in EHR will also validate and disable ICDs in the list that are no longer valid for further use. This is essentially talking about your favorites and things like that. If there was a list such as Mnemonic list or something along those lines, or my list where you were using ICD-9 codes, those will be grayed out, and you'll need to rebuild them with your ICD-10 codes. Okay. Point, we've talked about basically a lot of stuff that's just industry related. Information that you could have gotten by doing Google searches and running anything like that, and just getting into the system and going out into the industry and typing in key phrases like SNOMED or ICD10, any of those values to get some of this information. We wanted a platform to give you, a breakdown of the difference between ICD10 and ICD-9 and SNOMED. So that was that whole section. Again, just in terminology and information. Does this make you a certified coder in ICD-10? Not by any means. Does it make you an expert in SNOMED? Again, not by any means. But it does give you the blocks required to utilize the application. So let's file maintenance. At this point, we're going to stop here with the PowerPoint. We're going to get into the application. I'm sure many of you are relieved, so you could stop hearing me just lecture, and now we could get into the actual application and see what the system has to offer and how everything is going to work. So I'm going to go ahead and share the application. We're going to go right into file maintenance, give it to catch up with our thoughts. What we're going to talk about here in file maintenance is we're going to go in and we're going to talk about the ICD-CM code master file. We're about the diagnosis code library. We're going to talk about the payer master file as well as the diagnosis categories master file. Some values are required for setup. We're going to talk about that and what's actually required and what you're going to need to do in order to application. Start with the ICM so here you can see that I'm in file maintenance. You get maintenance from your app launcher. Once in your app launcher, you'll see the enterprise and practice that you have specified up at the top. Under my master files, under system, and under EHR. Click on that, and you'll notice that under EHR or under EPM, it doesn't really matter. You'll still see those same ICD-CM code tables. Come here, and you're going to see this ICD-CM codes. Previously, this was actually called ICD-CM, ICD-9-CM codes. The reason why we've removed the ICD-9 is because this one table is going to house both your ICD-9 and ICD-10 codes, okay? So you'll have both those values. What I like to call this or refer to this as is the book. This is where all codes are going to live, all right? All these ICD codes, they count every October, right? So the providers, or excuse me, the clients are responsible for either purchasing the book, right? They have to buy the book, whether it's electronic or they have the paperback. Well, here they're going to have to buy the ICD-10, the ICD-10 book as well. So just the same thing that they've been going through for years, they're going to have to embed those new codes into your database. All right, stops me. We'll talk about it a little bit more and then we'll talk about how we're going to get those codes into our database. So if I go in, you'll notice that I have the ability to search by code or description. If I have ICD-10 codes embedded in my particular system, I'll be able to see those ICD-10 codes. Here you can see an ICD-10 code. I open it up. You'll hear the effective date and expiration date. You'll also see whether it's ICD-9 or ICD-10 and our description. So again, to see in here ICD-10 codes and ICD-10. Now, based upon this effective date, will allow me to actually search for this value in our EHR. The reason being is because of the effective date. This effective date was not until October 1st, 2014. No ICD-10 codes will show. Now, testing and things like that, you may want to turn some of these codes on. Right? So you would have to come in and effectively change the effective date. So there's one code. Now we'll take a look at the corresponding ICD code. All right, so you can again see ICD-9 code, their expiration date. Now, again, it's going to have these values expire. You're going to want it to expire on the last day of September, and then October 1st, you're going to want your new codes to come into effect. All right. So again, key here is that this one table, this book, houses both ICD-9, ICD-10. Based on the effective date is going to determine whether or not that value will be added when you run your search in EHR. The EHR is going to look at the encounter date, going to then look at the effective dates here in the background. So where it's ICD-9 or ICD-10, it's going to look at the effective date and expiration date. Based on that, it's going to populate your screen and show the values based on whether or not it's an effective or expiration meets the requirements of that encounter date. Just keep that in mind as we go in. Now, some of you may be asking, how do you get this information in your actual table? So the system isn't going to be shipped with ICD-10 from understanding. You're going to need to import the values. It's not going to be shipped with it. Again, from my understanding, is that the tables are too big. Just like the cross mappings for HLI, we're not going to be able to ship with those base tables. You're going to have to run the clinical data loader. All right. Just like that, the tables are too big to be incorporated within the actual shipment. So you have to run the import utility. Where you're going to find the import utility, I'm going to just show my entire desktop here. A second. All right. Where you're going to find the import utility is in your components folder. So you're going to go down to your components folder. A couple ways of getting there. The easiest way, if you don't know, is to go into System Admin. System Admin, go to Universal Preferences, and look at maybe your templates or maybe even your documents, and just copy this path. This will take you directly into where you need to go. Usually your cache file is not the best one because that'll be maybe your notepad. Like that. Just open up, copy it, and then you could drop it in by right-clicking on your Start button, going to your Open Windows Explorer, and paste it in there. If that's not your route of getting it, that's fine. I can go in and I could search or navigate to mine by clicking on my computer, open my computer window, going into my C drive, going down into NextGen, then my database. What database is it that I'm trying to set this up for? Here it's 57GR81. You can see here 57GR81. Don't mind the name. I overwrote this value. Come in. Once you get into your database, you'll come down and look for your components folder. A components folder. Take down. Find the Next-Gen Shared ICD CPT update utility. What just look for the ICD. So all right. So I get down to Next-Gen. I'll scroll until I find the shared. The scrolling. And what I'm looking for is Next-Gen Shared, and then I'm looking for the ICD piece of it. All right, there it is. ICD _ CPT4 utility. Utility EXE. So that's it. That's what I'm looking for. I'll pause a minute for you so you could either write it down or whatever you need to run, just so you have it. Now, who's going to be required to do this? Is it going to be a trainer? I doubt it. Is it going to be yourself? You maybe fall into that category that requires you to do it. But I just wanted to point it out that it is there. All right, open it up and take a look at it. So when I open it, over to the left-hand side here, you'll see your ICD10 section. This is the section that I'm interested in. You also can utilize your ICD9 and CPT4 values. It allows us to import all three sections. We're going to concentrate on the ICD10 value. So the first thing that you're going to do, you're going to have to select a file. So again, if you're doing it for a client, they're going to have that disk or however they receive the actual ICD codes, they'll have it, and you'll have to navigate out to it. For us, it'll already be there within the components folder, and what you're looking for is the ID value, the TXT. So I open that up, and it's already in there for me. You'll see your effective date. This is when do you want these ICD-10 codes to take effect. So I wanted to, I make the effective date yesterday, basically allowing for me to search through every ICD-10 value that's available. And entirely up to you. If you're doing testing and you want to see these ICD-10 codes, you can pick and choose the specific ICD-10 codes that you want, or you can go ahead and you could set it up in initial setting. Expiration date, I'm going to leave it as 99. That's fine. Use active expiration dates above to populate any blank dates in the imported file. So let's say they went in and they started building their ICD-10 values before they got this system, or before they started setting up their ICD-10 section, and left some values blank. Then this will just overwrite anything that's blank. Everything that's already in there, the system will leave alone. For me, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set all effective and expiration dates to the dates above, regardless of the dates imported. So you've seen it was imported with, what was it, October 1, 2012. Change it, so it just imports all. So satisfied with everything there, I'm just going to go down to the bottom right here and simply click on update. See it start running. It'll run the process there, and you'll see it completed. And that's how easy it is, folks. Ended 9/24/10/2, basically saying that it went through, it updated everything in that particular database. Now do the same thing with your ICD. So I wanted to go in and I had my ICD values. I can go in and I could change the dates so they expire on a specific date. All right. I do that if I needed to. You could view your logs. I'm not going to get into it. It runs the same way that the ICD10 did. But once you're done with that, I back in. If I run or take a look at that ICD10 code that we utilized earlier, same one that we looked at earlier, you'll see that the effective date is now yesterday. So if I go into an encounter from today, I'll be able to see all the ICD10 codes. If I go into an encounter from before yesterday, you not see any of the ICD10 codes. All right. So again, that allows you to import those specific values. All right. Move on. Your code table. About the code table, because again, if it doesn't exist in the code table, you won't be able to see it in your library. Hence, you won't be able to see it in your application. So it's got to live in the code table first. Now, let's take a look at our library and the things that we could do within our library. So I click on my libraries. Look at is our this code library. So if you see your diagnosis codes, you open that up. The default library. I can go in here. I could utilize the default code library as I would need to. But I do want to talk about one thing before we get in there. Well, two things essentially before we get in there. If you right click, you will see a GEMS update utility. GEMS update utility. Remember we were talking about earlier, and we mentioned that there may be specific pairs that utilize ICD-9 or ICD-10 codes when it's time to use ICD-10, so you're going to need to map those values. As well as we have something called the GEMS Map Legacy Search. You're going to need to run this GEMS update utility in order to utilize that application. So here's the actual tool. Now you have to have the 5.8 version 5.8.0.99 or later in order to use this. I believe the GR is going to be like 105 or something. And for those that don't know what I'm talking about, when you go into your next gen help, you'll see a specific number here characterized with it, 5.0. Whatever the value is. I think it's 104 actually that's going out. I spoke too soon. That's going out with GR. Not 100% sure on that, but that's my understanding. And you'll have to find the GEMS for our ER. Excuse me. This is linking to the wrong database. So I went to the right database. Notice it was in our components folder. Well, here's our GEM 2014. I guess that's the one to use. To be honest with you guys, I haven't seen this function correctly, but we'll take a look at it. GEMs or options. I don't think I want anything there. Alright, let's see if we can load. This had some bugs previously. So this side is just giving you your filter options. See all the values there. You'll see the exact max, approximate matching, and we had and import those values. Now, target payer, if there was a specific payer that you wanted to set this up for. Remember, I mentioned that certain payers you go in and really for, let's say that it was a user, you'd go in and do that. We're just for it all. If that works, or if it causes us to effective date. Doing again is loading our ICD10 values and giving us a not responding there, but it's giving us our ICD10 values into our system and comparing ICD9 to ICD10, which will then allow the to bridge the language gap when you get into the actual application. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a couple minutes when we get into the EHR and we get to the diagnosis section, where you can see the legacy mapping there that would allow for us to run the between ICD9 and ICD10. Essentially, your GEMS mapping. Oh, running. Or we might stop it because we need to move on. All right. Your GEMS. There's another utility here. Add code to ICD master file from ICD master file. So essentially what this does is it allows us to look at the ICD master file. So let's say that you just import all your ICD9 codes into the ICD master file. That's this file here. You went into your library and you want to pull those values in. As you know, your diagnosis codes you have to build into your library. I double clicked on it. Sorry, got click happy there for a second. Pull those codes in, we give you a utility here that allowed you to add the codes. So let's say that I wanted to add my ICD-10 codes and I wanted a specific values for testing. Let's say that I wanted A00 through A22. All right, I can go in and I'd say, overwrite the master description in the file, and I can pull these values in. Essentially, what will happen? I'm not going to do it right now, but what will happen down here? You'll see at the bottom the ICD code count. It'll just basically tell you how many codes were just imported into your system. All right, you could do A through Z if you wanted to. It doesn't matter. Imported codes effective on. Anything that's effective on this particular date or after will be pulled in. So, and you have that capability. And just some tools to make it easier. We talked about configuring the system. Just to rehash here, you have your clinical data loader, which is going to give you your cross mappings from HLI, or Health Language Inc. So that's when you're going to have to do the clinical data loader. You're going to have to import your ICD-10 codes utilizing the nextgen.shared.icd_cp4_updateutility.exe found in your components folder. You have your GEMS update. All right, so your GEMS update, three different values that you have to do in order to utilize this problems module. You then could pull in your values from ICD9 from the master file into your default library. Let's say default library here. Default library. So you'll notice that you have the ability to utilize a code search by all codes or by a specific value, ICD9 or ICD10. Again, they both live in this file. You by code or you can go by description. If you're going by code, type code. All right, in the code, and you'll see that there's actually a new color for actual type, so you can see exactly what type this particular code is. You'll have your effective date and expiration. Now they're grayed out. Why are they grayed out? Because they're set in your master file under that ICD where I first showed you or first navigated out to. Left, you'll see, or excuse me, top right, you'll see your categories. You actually search or filter by category if you wanted to. So you knew that the code existed in a specific category, you search there. You have your description. All right, this is the ICD description, the book description. User description is relevant as it was previously because of the Health Language Inc. Previously, you had to come in here and add your user description. That's the only way that you would be able to basically get a user-defined value. This is embedded within the synonyms, again delivered by Health Language Inc. But below that is where you'll see your general tab. This is where the general equivalency mapping, if that utility worked. 1 minute. I just didn't want to waste the time to do the whole thing. You'll see the actual codes showing up here. Now, these are what they consider alternative codes or alternate codes, excuse me. This is basically saying that on the claims document, it was a biller that did not accept ICD-10 codes. This is a corresponding ICD-9 code that would go across. Now, I manually built this one in just for visual purposes so you could see it. But GEMS utility that we just seen will essentially load these values in. So, effective date of 9/1/2013 and expiration of 12/30/31/2030, and that's the effective code. Now, this is only going to show on the claims the actual application. If you haven't picked up on it yet, the diagnosis library, the search engine, is going to be the same whether you're using EPM, EHR, any one of them. It's all using the same search engine. Whether you're from a template, from the module, all the same search engine. Your PEP. If you did it for a specific payer, so this is just in general. So let's say that you weren't sure about this particular payer, whether or not they accepted ICD-9 or ICD-10, you would get the code or be able to utilize that code on the claims document. Let's say it was for a specific payer. The specific payer, we could select a specific payer to have it associated with. Come on out of there. Sorry, it got froze there. But have it with a specific payer. So if you knew that workers' comp, this specific payer, and they didn't use ICD-10, you could say, all right, well then use these ICD-9 equivalent codes. The only other thing is this pregnancy indicator that's been added to that particular section. That's about it. So let's look now at the payer table. So I mentioned to you earlier, we're going to blur the lines a little bit when it comes to EPM, EHR, and this is one. So I'm going to go into Blue Cross or Blue Shield of California. It's the one I always pick on. Under our system, under our defaults 2, you'll send diagnosis mapping on claim. So turn that on, I'll be able to use one of 3 options. You'll have your general mappings only, your payer mappings only. This is talking about those tabs that we just seen in the library. Or payer mappings, if not, use your general mapping. So it's going to check the payer mappings first to see if there's any GEM equivalencies out there. Or if that doesn't work, it's going to then go to the general tab. So we've seen those 2 tabs just in the actual library. So this is where you could turn it on, payer, basically determine what value is going to show on the actual claims. Next, you may see this here. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Where is it? There's a new value. It's called problem clinical status. This is to allow you to populate information in the clinical status. So in EHR, under your problems, there's a clinical status list here, very similar to what we have in EHR for our severity, our status. You could build those values, right? Well, in maintenance, thing, and it's called your problems clinical status. You create a new value, fill in the information, and you'll be able to see that. So that you should be able to see once we go back into the application under your problem clinical status. Next one here that we're going to talk about is your diagnosis categories. So I noticed when we were in EHR, we research, you have diagnosis categories that go up within the system. All right. Well, first, in order to get those categories in there, you have to know how to create them and how to use them. All right. Under diagnosis categories, there's a little digit that I utilize that is easy for the end user to understand and build their own categories. Create, populate, associate, and test. Create, populate, and test. Create, populate, associate, and test. And basically, that breaks down what you need to do in order to see these values in EHR. You can see here, there's already a ton of them that are created already. Let's utilize, KBM utilizes these as pick lists within certain sections of the application. So you already have them built for you. If you open one up, you have CAD, chest pain, and angina. If I open it up, you'll see that it's already created and populated. All you have to do is associate it with a provider. Let's say that you wanted to create one scratch. Now, I always jump up and down when it comes to these categories because we've had these categories as long as I could remember. Simple to utilize, yet providers go in and they complain about our search capabilities in the current diagnosis module. Current diagnosis module, yeah, I get it. It wasn't the greatest. But if you give your clients the tools to succeed, it's a lot easier. And what does it mean? Well, under the diagnosis categories list, if you just simply took a fee ticket, created a category for fee ticket, and gave it to all the providers, you would already bring their troubles and the pain that they were having in searching for a value. Or you could create it top 2500, whatever the case may be. Entirely up to you. Go ahead and create an easy one. All you do is create. So create, populate, associate, and test, right? So come in, I hit new. Creating it. Short description. That's creating it right there. Now you can populate it. What values do you want to see in that particular code? Do you want ICD10 values? All right. Do you want ICD9 values? Both. You can by either your key, your diagnosis, search for key phrase anywhere in the field. It's entirely up to you how you do that. Here, you could show ICD9 or ICD10 or both. And then once you're done, you say OK. So two of the pieces, created it, populated it. I want to point out that down here, showing EPM or showing EHR, you now have the capability of depicting what information is going to show in what. So I mentioned to you that the search engine is going to run, whether it's in EHR under the module, in EHR in the template, or if it's in EPM. So you have the choice of what categories you want to show in EHR versus EPM. Now I've created it, I can hit next to create additional ones, or I could say okay. That's to save it into my list there. So all the way there, I've done two of the four options: create, populate. Now we associate it. Who do we need to associate it with? We need to associate it with a provider. This is a provider level. For them, I'm just going to take a look here and see what provider it is, and it is my alter ego up there, Mr. Anderson. And we'll take a look at that here in a second. And I apologize. All right, that's saved in there. We have a fee ticket in there. And close this. Say okay. Again, show an EPM, show an EHR. Entirely up to you what you do with that. From there, you're going to go into the provider table. You're going to find your provider. Again, mine was Dr. Anderson. I'm going to open up. And surprise, here in the provider table, there is a tab that says categories. Categories, we're dealing with diagnosis right now. I found fee ticket. The thing about this is you do have to go in and manually search it, type it, and it'll jump to it. So here's my fee ticket. Slide, move on. Populate, associate, last up. Right? So we did everything we needed to. EHR, when we run a search, there's a ticket. There's use. It's the guys. And we had this capability in the current diagnosis module, but I do want to reiterate it because it does make things easier for your end users. Now, the whole purpose of me walking through that was not basically to show you how to create a category, but I did want to reiterate some of the information that I never knew that existed. I just want to make sure that you know that it exists, how it gets into the actual EHR application, and how you get it there. The big one that people forget is the associate. It's easy for them to create and populate. They get that point of it, but they forget to associate it with the provider. So it's all based on a provider, what categories are going to show. So keep that in mind. But what we're interested in is something than that. We actually now have the capability of sharing these values across to other practices. So if I right-click on chest pain, I can practice access and pick and choose what practice I created in or what practice I share it with. So I had my fee ticket. All right. The fee ticket. Right-click, go to practice. I can now say make it available to all practices. Big enhancement, big improvement. That's it for your diagnosis categories. You say okay. For the HCC and RxHCC, with EHR, you noticed value here that gives H. What it does is it applies for the Medicare Advantage Plus program. You need it? Clients are not. All right. What it does is it gives different ratios based upon the complexity of the diagnosis and allows for different reimbursement based on that complexity. All right. If it's not using it, get off, because they need to see it. If they are using it, they know about it. You don't need to explain to them what HCC is or what RxHCC is. They already know. So all these values here that I could add to my list there will be out of sight, out of mind. They won't even see it. All right. But you have to know where it is and how to turn it on and how to turn it off. This is going to be available to you in your practice preferences. So here in file maintenance, under EHR, under practice, you're going to select the practice that you're working with. We're going to go under your preferences. Along the left-hand side, a preference list. Under that, you're going to look for charge entry. Under charge entry, you'll see this differentiated risk adjusted diagnosis. This value right here, whether you turn it on or turn it off, is going to depict if that HCC or RxHCC information is being used. It's also going to determine whether or not the client is going to utilize the Medicare Advantage program. Right? So that value, again, charge entry, different risk adjusted diagnosis. So keep that in mind. It's not important that you know exactly what the what Medicare Advantage Plus program does or how the ratios work or any of that, but it's important that you do understand where to turn it on and turn it off. Also notice that in my application, I have an additional toolbar here. This is what we call the patient information toolbar. Some relevant information, you'll see, demographics, some medical record information, whatever it is that you really want to see on here, you can. What we're interested in is under problems, under the allergies, under the diagnosis, you'll see the actual number that's associated with that particular value. What that's saying is that's how many values are currently in this patient's chart. What's nice about it is that you could see exactly what those problems are. Right, so here, if I was working on any template throughout the entire practice, I'd be able to go in there, highlight or hover over that particular problem section, and be able to see this relevant information. The diagnosis, I can go in, I can take a look at my diagnosis, I can see exactly what's going on with that particular patient. If I had my diagnosis or my problems module closed, I come up and I could actually click on number, not the word, but the number, and it'll launch that module for me. So the use, again, makes it easy for me. I can click on the number, turn it and open it up. Now, it was turned off when I first got my application. I think out of the box they're going to try to have it turned on, but I still need you to understand where it's turned on and where it's turned off. So again, I'm in practice preferences already. And on the left-hand side here, you'll actually see patient information bar. Set that up, you'll see here up at the top, show patient information bar. This mark alone will allow you to see that information bar. The demographic information. What information is it that you want to see on the chart? So here, you'll notice that I only have 2 values selected. If I wanted to, I can come in and I could add another value. So if it was a nickname or if it was preferred language or whatever the case is, I'll be able to select up to 3 different values to show in that particular section. Then you have your template customization. This allows for you to add specific information into the system. So here, if you wanted to be able to see, just when you have these active text values at the bottom, you wanted to see another one, you could add up to 3 different demographic, and I say that with emphasis on purpose, demographic values. These are only showing demographic information. And a field pop-up, if you wanted to navigate down to a specific field on that particular template, you could. Right? Again, demographic information only. Editable and expandable. I'll see that information once you log out and log back in. The important part from our perspective is just being able to view the diagnosis and problem list from within the application. Like anything, when you have new capabilities within the application, there are new rights and permissions. So that brings us to System Admin. In System Admin, you will find additional rights and permissions. We give our rights and permissions at the group level. So here you see I'm on the group. I will simply select the Rights tab. And the first one that we'll take a look at is here under your modules. Down, you'll see medical records. And records, you will see the problems list. Here's your problems list. This gives you the ability to view, add, update, delete, and or print the values from your problems tab. So here in EHR, if you were to limit the capability of your end user, this is where you would do it. That is the module options. You have some operational options. If you scroll down, you'll actually see a problems value. Here. Add up. It shows you the add practice ICD synonyms, add SNOMED synonyms. So the capability of doing this at both the practice and the user level. I'm not particularly sold on which side of the fence I fall on this, just because the synonyms, as we mentioned earlier, will track and be followed across the actual patient's visit, and that visit across their chart. So patient, if the end user added some type of slang as synonym that wasn't relevant, it'd still be in the patient's chart go forward. So tread softly, and as far as who you would give these to, I would probably only give it to the admin folks, the guys that are going to run this thing. And if there's a synonym that needs to be added, I would put it through a process and make sure that it's a relevant synonym to be added. The reason I say that is because with Health Language Inc. giving us the synonyms, there's very little for us to have to worry about adding into the patient's or adding as far as synonyms are considered. So those that you need to be aware of. All right. Stop for a second. So before we move on, look at one last thing. Info. One last thing. Opportunity to say goodbye to the old diagnosis search engine. All right. Yes, it's there. Yes, it still works, and the functionality is there. And this I mentioned to you previously, as far as you know, the categories have been there even back with this search engine. It was up to the end users to determine what information was shown in there. A question about the ICD utility. Can you run the ICD utility before installing KBM 8.3? From my understanding, you should do everything that you need to prior to updating the KBM. So anything that was done in set up for your base as far as 5.8, that you roll all the things that we mentioned and then run your KBM. So with the saying goodbye to the diagnosis module, let's go ahead and get into our session now. Start with the problems again, and you see this module, and you see these two tabs at the top. I want to automatically think clinical and billing, clinical and billing, clinical and billing, clinical and billing. All right, I can't express it enough. This is the side that the providers essentially are going to document whatever their clinical findings are. you notice that I have 3 values, and here I have 6 values. All right. Why have a deviation in the numeric values of what you would have from a findings to a diagnosis finding? Those that have any understanding of the radiology template set, we had a problems list for many years. And what we tell our cardiologists is the same thing that I'm going to tell you about this problems list. What you put in here is your clinically relevant or hot items should be here. I'll find chronic conditions here? Yes. Are they pulled in automatically from the templates during migration? Yes. So anything that was in that chronic section is going to be found here. Is it solely for just chronic findings? No. Okay. This is a section where the provider can put in any clinically relevant. So if the provider sees that some finding is relevant to this patient's history, the scenario is, I'm a provider for this patient today. I'll put everything that I need into that patient's chart, that if I was on a bus, go home, did not come back and was not able to care for this patient no longer, and one of my colleagues needed to come in and actually care for the patient, they would find and see the exact information that is important to the health care and well-being of this particular patient. All right. A question there. This is an update question. What happens if the database is upgraded to 5.8 prior to running the CDL? Would the upgrade have to be off and run the CDL ran first? No, the CDL should be ran after your update. So once you update to 5.8, then you're going to do all of the CDL. You're going to do the GEMS, all that stuff after you do your 5.8 update. Plenty of documentation. Trust me on the install process of this. I'm just giving you a high-level overview of it. Again, back to our problems list. Relevant. If I was no longer able to care for my patient tomorrow, what would I do? What information needs to be there so my colleague can go in and get paint a picture of exactly what's going on with this patient's health? That's how you have to think about this problems list. Will it have chronic conditions? Yes. Have things that are not chronic that just want to be tracked by that particular provider? Yes. Let's say that there was let's say the patient has a cold, all right? The first the patient comes in, the provider doesn't document on the problem list the cold. They only do it in the billing list. Is it relevant that it goes on the problem list? Maybe. It's up to the particular provider, clinical findings. But it is relevant for that visit because that's what the patient came in for from a billing perspective. They came for a cold. So guess what needs to be on the ICD or the billing piece of it? A cold needs to be there. All right. I understand that, and we'll move through the application and hold your questions, and we'll address them at the end. List. Your refresh option. So you needed to refresh what was going on in this window. So let's say that somebody doing clinical reconciliation and pulling data in while you're actually going through the actual patient visit. You can refresh, and this will refresh this particular page for you. So if there's any information that was being updated while you were on it, you're able to see that information come in instead of having to go out of the actual application, out of the module, and then go back down to the module and relaunch it. Anytime you see the little cog there, that's your preferences. Open it up. You set columns to display. Right. What do you want to do? Open up, go through and pick and choose what items I want to pull over from left to the right. So if I found one that I wanted, I could edit over. Now I have track there. I can move it up where I want it. All right, I'm satisfied with that. Say OK. I'll now see a new tracked item in there. You can see here anything with a check mark off to the left, a value that is going to be visible within my columns. These are columns here. I can group, which is really just going to take away the fully specified name and only show the description. So here you see the fully specified name. If I go back in and I regroup it, you'll see that those are the values that it categorizes it within. Right? So that's the fully specified name value, and you can see that group. You can expand all or collapse all. You could set your column, so if something wasn't showing up properly, you could reset. Use multi-select SNOMED search. Will turn on or off. All right. It will allow you to use the shopping cart within this section. When in your search, you can select the multiple values and have them all populate in the shopping cart, and then accept them all at once into the system. All right. I'm going to leave this one off. We'll turn it on the billing list. Here are all statuses. Basically saying if I had an inactive value, I would still see it. It only wanted to show active problems. I can filter it out and only allow me to see the active problems within the module. I tracked problems only. So let's say that there was something that the provider wanted to track. The patient's been having a lot of problems with it. They keep coming back to the office with symptoms of their asthma acting up or flaring up, and the provider wanted to track it. All right. Well, this allows us to filter out by my tracked problems. Asthma was one of my tracked problems. It filtered out the rest of the values, and all being is chronic problems only. So if anything that was marked as chronic, we will see that. Now you can double dip. You can have show chronic only and filter it down so you're seeing your tracked problems as well. You can have it a double filter, so to speak, on these values if you need it to. Patient's age over to the right. See your columns here. You can move your columns over if you wanted to. So by clicking, drag, and dropping, I could reorganize these columns. I can also, let's go and minimize this. I could also basically put a push pin in it and stabilize it. So let's say that the fully specified name wanted to remain in place. Now here, you notice that I have to scroll to see the rest of my fields. Oh, it didn't. I apologize here. At the bottom here, if I had to scroll still, would remain in place. I'm not sure. Maybe I have enough displayed. There we go. So here you can see I scroll, see it remains in place. Let me add a couple more. We have more. The fully specified name will remain in place as I could scroll through my options. So pretty slick feature. Again, pushing off to the left. When I scroll, everything will just go with it. Push it down. That one stays stationary. Again, pretty cool functionality there. You can right-click with the window, refresh, basically do everything that you could do from the icons in here. I just wanted to point that out that it is. is there. All right, so here you can see I scroll, see it remains in place. Let me add a couple more. Yeah, more. You fully specified name will remain in place as I could scroll through my options. So pretty slick feature. Again, pushing off to the left. When I scroll, everything will just go with it. That one stays stationary. Again, pretty cool functionality there. You can right-click with the window, refresh, basically do everything that you could do from the icons in here. I just wanted to point that out that it is there. All right, so that's the top portion there. I'm going to skip the problems and recode. And you have the ability to resolve it. So if you wanted to resolve your problem, you can. So if this problem didn't exist no more, you can go in and you can resolve it. Is it good practice to resolve problems that are no longer a problem? Yes, it is. Please do it. Set to chronic. So something that you needed to document as chronic, such as asthma, I could highlight it, I could click on set to chronic, and then accept it. Notice down here that the chronic option is available. This is a huge improvement from what we had previously. Previously, the chronic was found under the status, whether it was the problem status or the clinical status, so it would take away from one of those values. Now the chronic value is outside, so you could actually document a status and that the problem is chronic. Highlight value, you accept it, add it up here. If you click in the box, it's not going to do anything. You actually have to highlight it and then click on set to chronic or turn it on or off there. Again, that'll allow you to filter a particular value by chronic if you had it as chronic. You'll have the capability of deleting, again, based on your settings, your settings in System Admin. It's up in arms when it comes to deleting options. We've always had the ability to delete. It's just whether or not that user or the group has the ability to delete. Keep that in mind, when dealing with it. Resources. Resources is our education. It's our patient education. It's also your clinical decision support. So those values, we do have a session that we'll cover later this week on it, but I do want to just point out some base things, some base values. So you have internal patient education. Your internal patient education is your HealthWise application. Your HealthWise application is the patient education that we utilize. If you're installed with HealthWise, you're able to see that patient education. This application or this version of my database is not set up for HealthWise or internal patient education. Like I mentioned, there is a class on that. During that class, we go through the setup process, what's necessary, how to download it, how it works, everything from. All right, so just keep that in mind. I'm just giving you a high level. Excel patient education. Let's say that the practice has purchased a application that is not HealthWise. We'll still sync up with our application so they can go in and utilize it as long as it's it's HL7 info standard capable. It's a requirement that we needed, and we do have that for our internal as well as external. Then you have your clinical decision support. Clinical decision support is to assist the provider in making a clinical decision. So you have two that are for patient information, and you have two that are set up for your provider. And your external provider resource, that value is HL7 info standard ready. It basically allows you, if you have a website or something like that, like we have, people utilize Hippocrates for medications for their external reference. We have that option in the mission module, and we're just sharing the wealth and giving the options, making the options available here in the other modules. So you that education piece there. So those are your options, again, for your resources. And again, if you right-click, you can get the resources from there as well. Notes, if you needed to add a note, you can. All right. It'll actually capture time date stamp on it there for you, who it was. You can come in, you could manipulate the columns there, delete a note, you could add or update a note if you wanted to. You'll see that information in there. History, so if there was any history that was corresponding with this, you'd be able to see it. Who added it, when it was added, what information was added on it. Again, you have a cog down there, allows you to pick and choose what information goes into it. This can a little internal audit within the actual page chart, which is really cool because when we get to recoding, we'll take a look at that section for view history. Reconcile, clinical reconciliation is a new for us. Well, not new because we had it previously, but we were only able to reconcile information for your medical. So the requirements for meaningful use came out, and they said that in order for you to meet that piece of meaningful use requirement, you need to be able to reconcile medications, allergies, and problems. So it would allow you to reconcile that information. Reconcile would basically allow you to compare external data from CCD or SureScripts, and basically compare information and pull that information into your system. You have another class that's completely based on this clinical reconciliation. Believe it or not, we're actually delivering it after this session is concluded. So sign up for that class. I'll see you, and we'll talk about it more at that point. Then here your active billing ICD list. So earlier I mentioned they have the capability of searching for a clinical value, and with one click, send that clinical value to your billing section. All right. So here we can go in, we add a problem, and simply once we're done adding the problem, click on that button, and it over to the diagnosis module. All right. So we'll take a look at that, and we'll see it once we go through the search engine here in a minute. Add tracked problems. So if it's not a tracked problem, you could add to the tracked problems and move from my tracked problems. If it's a tracked problem, the add is going to be grayed out and the remove is going to be activated, and vice versa. So it's basically a toggle switch between the values. You opt in your cancel, as you've seen when I changed the chronic option there, and allowed me to accept and cancel. See your concept ID. This is the concept ID. This is, again, not really relevant to the end user, but relevant for the system, so to speak. Your description, this is your synonym, all right, versus your fully specified name. So if there's another name for it, as you see here, the fully specified name is low back pain, but the description here is pain in the lumbar region. So again, it's just a way of categorizing it versus a user description or synonym, and we'll see that here in a minute. So your onset date. Remember, I mentioned to you that the problems list is codified in SNOMED, and it is not level, it is patient level. You'll see that. Resolved and last addressed. You'll resolve by, so if you did go in and resolve it, or resolve reason, you add information. You have the ability to document something as chronic outside of utilizing the active list. So now you could have an active chronic issue. Here's your clinical status. What we were looking at in file maintenance, I showed you where that was. elsewhere. So if it was documented, let's say that it was captured through a clinical reconciliation utility, that information would populate as prescribed recorded elsewhere, and then underneath recorded elsewhere, or the writer recorded elsewhere where it says sourced, you'll actually see where that information came from. Again, you have a secondary condition. So if this was not a primary condition but a secondary condition, you'd be able to document it as such. An example of that would be, let's say that the patient diabetes, they're getting foot ulcers. They're getting chronic foot ulcers. Well, foot ulcers would be a secondary condition of the diabetes. So you're able to document that accurately. Below that, you have your provider and your location. All right. It's going to depict based upon the information that's populated at the top. Then your laterality, so your side, and of course your site if you need to document that. So that's everything here. Let's take a look at the search engine and we'll talk about recoding. So again, is your search engine. What's nice about it, a search based off of what you call something and find that particular value. So I knew it was, for ease of use, we talked about myocardial infarction, right? So type in myocardial infarction, or I could just type in MI. All right. It pulled up, it found it for me. I could then utilize that value. I could type in heart attack and find heart attack. Notice down here, add to my track problems. It's going to add it to the track problems if I choose. I can also right click and view and add synonyms. So synonyms that are utilized for myocardial infarction, all these that correspond with it. Now, depending on your practice templates or settings, your system admin settings is going to determine whether or not you have the capability of adding practice synonyms or user synonyms. Now, it's just a little plus sign, and you can do whatever you want. Now, the problem with that being is if I add that synonym, it's going to track that synonym as synonym 18 across the patient's chart. Fully specified name will still depict the actual right name of it, but it's found everywhere as synonym 18. So this is why, as I mentioned, I'm not sure which fence I'm on for adding these values. As seen, I was able to add and delete values by simply clicking on the red X. Select chosen synonym on OK. So if I add a synonym and I select that checkbox, instead of having to hit OK, then go in, search for it again, then hit OK again, it'll allow it to automatically add that value to my patient's chart. So there it is. It added a new value into my patient's chart. It's now there and ready to be utilized. All right, that's our search engine. Let's talk about recoding. Say that you coded something or you've documented something when you first seen the patient, but it was pending workup. You wanted to see, based on the MRI, whether or not it was actually back pain or something else. So you come in, you get the results back, you go back in, and you could recode as pain. Pain in the neck is the value that I want, and of back pain. So back pain has been removed and neck pain has been added. Now, this is where I wanted to show you the actual history. History actually audits exactly what's going on with this particular patient. All right, you can see here information that's going on with that particular patient. And that's great because I'm logged in as this particular person, not that one. But I'll have to report that. But as you can see, it captures the information, so now I have that information there. If I wanted to add that note or something along those lines to it to say that it was found based off of clinical information, or I received the x-ray back and it shows that it's trauma versus back pain, or, you know, whatever the case may be, I could document that information. Right, so that is it for our SNOMED. No, I apologize, it is not it. We forgot to send the value over with the ease of use, one click, right? So, mitral valve regurgitation, or MI. Here we can click on Add to Billing List. I just want to make sure that it doesn't exist in there. It doesn't. Now I can go in, I can say Add Billing ICD List. This is an example where it gave us multiple values, and this is good because usually it's a one-to-one relationship and there's no real need for us to select a secondary option. So you won't even see this window here if it's a one-to-one relationship. If it's a one-to-one relationship, it sends it automatically over into the diagnosis or the billing side. Here was two different options that it gave us. So we can go in and we could use an ICD10 value, or we can use an ICD9 value. I'm not sure why it's given us 20 of them, but it is. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select this one. I'm satisfied. I select. I'll push that into the side, and here you have it. 94, based on the start of the encounter, you'll see all that information, and you will now see that value come through. Is that easy to have a one-to-one relationship? Are you always going to have a one-to-one relationship? No, I mentioned that earlier. You may have a simple cold you're not tracking yet because it's not something that's prolonged. It's just a cold. So that you may not add to the problems list. You'll review your problems list and then simply go in and add the code via the billing side. All right, so here's your billing side. And a lot quicker because we've already talked about a lot of the functionality and features that we have in the billing with the problem section. You refresh. All right, I'm going to refresh your list. You have your preferences. And with COG, right? You display what information you want to show. You ungroup. Now you're just seeing all the information ungrouped. You can end all, collapse all, or reset columns. Very self-explanatory. Here I have Use Multi-Select ICD. We'll turn that on. All it is a shopping cart. Remember I mentioned it on the other one. Here we'll go in and we'll actually see it. Same functionality with your columns. If you want to make one stationary, you can. And if you had the scroll option at the bottom, that value would stay there and you'd be able to scroll forward. We're going to ICD and recur for right now. We'll talk about resolve. So I see I don't have anything that's resolved, but they're encounter based. So if there was something that I needed to resolve, I could highlight it, resolve it, accept. It'll then pull that value down into my resolved section. Now, if I needed to, and I had values in my resolved section, I could simply go in and recur that value, then add it for today's encounter. Remember, the billing aspect of it is encounter specific, so it's all based upon that encounter of what you're going to see for today's super bill. See that it was resolved at one point, you now see that list. Set to chronic. Again, if it was chronic, this is a huge enhancement. Again, we don't have the capability of documenting that it's a chronic issue, but we can also say that it's an active chronic issue with a mild to moderate severity. Right? So we don't lose those, whereas previously the chronic would have to be documented under your status or under your severity. Our providers have been asking for this for a long time. Now we're able to give it to them. Right? Obviously, you have the ability to delete based on your values. Interaction, so this is your drug utilization review. If you need to check an interaction with that particular element, you can. that check interaction. Your resources, again, the same thing. If you right-click, you can go in and you could find some options there as well. Resources, as soon as you see resources, I want to think patient education and clinical decision support. All right. Set problem list. So if you have those users that are familiar with the ICD codes, I mean, we've been forcing them for years to use ICD codes. So now you could actually send it to the problem list. Just highlight again. There's multiple options, so it pulled those values up. You see that value added into our problem list. So we get from both options now. Right is your clinical reconciliation. If you open it from this section, reconcile, it's going to open in what we call module only mode. Basically going to only open for this particular section within that window. Everything else will be grayed out. Your accept and cancel, so if I made any alterations to this, that's available for me to save my changes. Your encounter, your code, and your description, again, important information for the system. We taught the chronic, the status, and the severity. Elsewhere, if it was a reconciled information, if they recorded elsewhere, your source would say, fill up the street, whatever the case may be. And lastly, you have your notes there. So from a superficial aspect, let's take a look now at the search engine. So go on your add values. Now you can come in here. You could search by diagnosis. You could search by code. It matters however you want to do it. If you search by, I guess, we'll look and see if we could find anything there. Now, broad, such as ankle, I have to go in and a more specific search. It did find it. Hold on, okay. There we go. Did find it, and I could document, whatever the case is for this particular patient. So here, if it was that, I double click, it drops it into my my shopping cart. So as I mentioned to you previously, we have our shopping cart there based on your preferences. You select multiple values and drop them in. All right. So again, pretty cool functionality. Here you're seeing ICD10 codes and ICD9 codes. Why is that? Because we set our system up this morning when we first went in based upon ICD9 codes and ICD10 codes. There's another option here. I just want to cancel out real quick. There is another option here that is cool. So basically, what it's called is the patient-provider integrated search results. If the patient has you already in their chart and I use it regularly, it'll put that value up to the top. I don't know if this will work because asthma may have been pulled from a previous data. It should take the same value of asthma that this patient already has in their system and put it up to the top or bubble it up to the top. That is what it did here. It pulled in that value, and it looks at basically behind the scenes. There's an algorithm that's running, and the provider, if they use it a certain amount of times, it stores to a table, and then it looks at does the patient already have some form of that diagnosis in their chart currently, and then based off of those two searches, if it finds something, it'll pull it up to the top as you see here. So pretty cool functionality. Diagnosis. And hold on. As you can see, this is the patient diagnosis that we just searched for, but it's also the same value that got bubbled to the forefront. the patient diagnosis. So if you knew there was a previous diagnosis, you could either go searching for it, or you just come in here, click on the diagnosis, find whatever value it is, and pull that value in. Favorites. All right, your favorites is to the my favorites that we currently utilize from a template perspective in EHR. At the person level. So if I wanted to, I can simply click on favorites, the little plus sign, and say and favorites. So if I went into the diagnosis and I said, you know what, this is lumbago is one of my favorites, I go in, I can click add to favorite group. It'll give me, if there's multiple favorites there, it'll give me a list. Click. Guess now I'll find that value under there. Since we started talking about the right click, you can add synonyms. Here's all the values for lumbago. All right. So on these values will show the same exact diagnosis code. These are all synonyms that have been given to us based upon Inc. So this is why I don't see a huge reason to need to be able to put in more synonyms. You can on your values. We already seen how this works. The other thing that we can do here is select shows on okay, we talked about that, but add selected synonym to favorites. So not only can we select it and have it added to the patient's chart, we can also add it to our favorites list within our module. Down below, looky, what we have here, we have categories, right? Create, populate, associate, and test. Here's our fee ticket, one that we created. Here's our values that we added to it, making it easy for your providers. Your providers are already used to the fee ticket and the values that are associated on them. So if you create a fee ticket category for them, guess what? They're not going to complain as much as, I can't find X, I can't find Z. All right? Just in there for them. Create. Down here is your ICD legacy mapping. This is supposed to allow us to for an ICD10 code, as I said, but give us the corresponding search for ICD9 code and give us the corresponding ICD10 code. There it is. So highlight that and pull it in, and we're going to pull in the ICD10 code. But this is to bridge the language gap. For those users that are very familiar with ICD-9, you're going to just go from knowing ICD-9 to knowing ICD-10. So they could go in and they could still use their ICD-9 skill set that they have, but find the corresponding ICD-10 values. Now, in order for that to work, you have to have run the GEMS utility successfully. That's the one that's here in file maintenance under your libraries, diagnosis. This one, this update utility. I only did it halfway and stopped because it's already been ran on my system. In order for that to work, you have to have ran that particular section. Down at the bottom, you do have some options here. What you want to see up here, if they're using the ACC and RxACC for that Medicare Advantage Plus program, you'll see the values. If you turn it off in file maintenance under practice preferences, you will not see those values. So you can turn those off for those that don't want to see them. Show description only. You'll see up here, you'll have your billing description and your clinical description. This is similar or equates to what we're talking about with the SNOMED, where we talked about specified name versus the user description. Well, the clinical description is like key terms, what we used to have as key terms. It's your synonyms. Your fully specified name is your billing description. This is what's going to go out to billing as usual. Now, the thing is that the clinical term is going to follow the patient throughout their visit, but billing aspect is going to be what a billing code or needs to be on the claim for billing. For our search engine there, as you can see, it is much easier to utilize. It is so nice, so nice. The functionality with it just huge. Again, it's not going out of your way to link in with a website of some sort. It's just right there. It's embedded within our system. Now, a lot of times during this section is when people start to ask me about IMO. Our still partners with IMO, and clients have the capability and are welcome to utilize IMO if they still choose to. This is just NextGen's update to the problems module. So again, it gives us the capability of whatever we need to from a problems perspective. So it's up to the client from this point forward of whether or not they want to utilize IMO, or whether or not they want to come in and switch to the next generation. So again, we don't tell them not to use IMO because they still are a partner of ours. We just tell them that it's up to them to decide whether they're going to continue to use IMO or they're going to just use our search tool. All right. So that is it from a engine functionality. Talked about synonyms. Just looking at my checklist now. The same search engine, as I mentioned to you, will be found in EHR, as you see here. It'll be found in EPM and templates. It'll also be found in some other areas as well, such as your labs. If you went in and you wanted to order something new, you'll hear your search all. It's a search engine. Okay? Not just showing it. You do the procedures module. You'll find a what I'm going to do is it's just going to show you the patient diagnosis. So the window here that you're seeing is show here. All it's showing is just that window, just the diagnoses that are associated with that patient's chart only. That's it. Ready. Let's see what I talked about that. I mentioned this when we were just in there. Patient diagnosis now allows for up to 12 diagnoses that used to be sent over to the superbill. So to your superbill, the features that were coming over, you'd have ability, as you can see, up to 12 diagnoses could be processed for patient's chart. There is a new column for the chronic value, so you can see that chronic option. We talked about that and the synonyms, so go on that. We talked HCC, we talked GEMS utility. We talked about all this. I'm just, again, guys, just looking at my checklist here. That's where we need to go. Right. So, now we're going to talk about is the KBM. Now, as I mentioned to you previously, we're not getting into KBM too much. In the next couple of weeks, you'll be receiving training on all the KBM. We'll be reviewing KBM and going through it. I just want to show you and talk about some of the things that NextGen is doing within the KBM. It's going to support both ICD-9, ICD-10 codes, the ability to forward ICD-9 codes to ICD-10 codes in real time. So that legacy search that we had, will have that capability. Support more detailed clinical documentation requirements. So I mentioned to you with the granularity of the ICD-10 values, they're going to need more fields to actually capture that information based on the analysis of all 71,000 ICD-10 diagnosis codes. One framework for managing diagnosis codes across the KBM, one template to manage diagnosis code setup, consistent diagnosis selection using new search tool, support up to 12 12 diagnosis codes per encounter, customizable assessment pop-ups for quick code entry. Tool documentation for transition to ICD-10, a step-by-step upgrade guide and detailed training materials are available in support of the hierarchical condition care category care code managing for care, manage for care clients. So the stuff that we mentioned throughout the actual demonstration today is going to be available here within the actual module. You'll be able to see within the module some of these values that you're seeing in the actual, or excuse me, some of the things that you're seeing in the template are things that you'll be able to see in the module, from the module, one of those ways. Here you see diagnosis history. This is your billing codes. This is your ICD section. Here you see your clinical problems. That's your SNOMED section, right? Your favorites, your my favorites, which is the drop down that we see in the actual module. And today's assessments, anything that you added today. All right. EHR reports for billing and ICD lists. Mention anything that's new for you're going to need to have the capability of reporting on. So we have capability. Enhanced diagnosis report to support ICD-10 and problems report for meaningful use too, which is your SNOMED piece. Here's diagnosis support for ICD-10, obviously giving us the capability of documenting chronic and running reports based on the chronic. You also have the capability now to filter based on your categories. Pretty simple. Two, this is all brand new detailed information. But if you understand the diagnosis module and run a report based off the diagnosis module, you'll be able to run a report based off of the problems module or the problems section of the problems module. There's a new problems tab. You'll be able to run your searches or your descriptions by clicking on the three-dot button. That'll run the search engine for you, and you can get into that. Then there's a filter up at the top, and these are all the same values that we just discussed in runtime, but allowing you to actually report based on those values. Converting and data migration. So, shipment of ICD-10 and the GEMS. The ICD-10 codes will be available free of charge to clients, internal staff through our agreement with 3M. New ICD-10 will have an effective date of 10/1/2014. The ICD-10 codes will be imported into the ICD master files via the ICD CPT update utility. It's not new news. We've talked about this throughout this entire session. The legacy ICD-9 codes will be set with an expiration date of 9/30/14. The new GEMS mapping will be loaded into the diagnosis code via the GEMS update utility. We've seen all those values going through this morning's demonstration. This is constantly changing. So the items mentioned above may change drastically by the time it's ready for general release. Compared to the version that I started off with, this has taken leaps and bounds over the last 2 months. So the code, the background, I mean, everything that they've done to it is really good, and you'll see the final result when it GRs. Just knowing that things will change all the way up to GR. Importing and migrating of data. So we kind of mentioned a lot of these things, and again, I'm just reiterating. Upgrade version 5.8 will need to be done prior to KBM 8.3. Upgraded and prior to importing of the data and migration of data. As we mentioned earlier, this was asked during one of those questions. Data loader utility to import the HLI data updates to the database. We actually seen a demonstration of how that was done, and or talked about how it was done. Didn't actually demo that yet because it's not on the resource center on nextgen.com. As soon as it GRs, you'll be able to get it out there. Ensure populate search table SQL job is running. Basically, when you run the clinical data loader, it's going to turn on certain SQL jobs. Just so that's there. And it's ICD CPT update utility to import ICD10 codes to the ICD-CM master file and diagnosis code library. We've mentioned all that, talked about that. Melody from CAM will support ICD-10 codes. This is to my trainers out there. If you get scheduled to demonstrate medical necessity, make sure you take the time out before your class, not saying an hour before your class, but before your class, like a couple days before your class, to make sure that you have medical necessity installed. It is a whole separate process. Make sure that it's installed and working on your system before you go and try to train. First bank updates, you're going to need to run your medication update for your DUR support. All right, so it's paramount that you go in and make sure that you have the latest and greatest medication update ran. Patients' data, patients' KBM chronic conditions, to the ICD, to the new EHR patient problem table codified in SNOMED. All that's saying is that, remember I mentioned to you earlier that the chronic table is going to basically populate your problems or your SNOMED piece. That's exactly what it's doing, is during the upgrade, that information will transcribe over. Diagnosis library, user description, the new ICD synonyms table, we mentioned this. Migrate KBM My List by provider to EHR favorites list by user. See, when your search engine, you'll be able to see that information in that My Favorites section. The table will appear on the diagnosis search screen and templates. That already, sorry. The gym update utility needs to be in ICD9 ICD10 comparison tool. The ICD9 ICD10 comparison tool is a utility that's out on nextgen.com that users could get used to the ICD9 codes and the ICD10 codes. So if I search for an ICD9 code, what ICD10 codes are going to show or going to populate. This is free of charge. You just got to go out and sign up for it. Once that, they'll be able to go start practicing with the ICD9 and ICD10 bridge language gap. Proprietary codes, support proprietary codes for ICD10. Proprietary codes can be added to the diagnosis library ICD9 COE master. New table proprietary code master will hold codes that are not official 3M codes, make searchable for the official 3M ICD codes associated with the HLI data. New ability that will allow clients to use proprietary codes cross-mapping. Basically, that's just saying that if they had previous ones, you could pull the information in and still utilize it. Before we open it up for questions, concludes our training. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. There's documentation that is out there, including PowerPoint, a workbook, an agenda, a checklist. There's a test out on e-learning, all right, on our LMS system, the same way that you were supposed to sign up for this class. You out there and challenge yourself. Take the test. Take the test. Being said, there's also going to get an assessment that's going to come out to you guys. Please be as honest as possible. It's basically breaking down, how this class was. Was it good? Was it bad? Did not like your trainer? That sort of thing. Those that don't have questions, I want to say thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you learned something. Those that have questions,